I'm Jude Fransman. I'm based at the Open University and I'm here representing a network which I co-convene. It's called the Rethinking Research Collaborative, and we're a quite informal network at the moment of organisations spanning academia, mainly in the Global South, civil society organisations and research brokers and capacity providers, as well as some organisations more involved with policy, both in the UK and through networked organisations like the African Academy of Sciences, for example, in Africa, Asia and Latin America. The mandate, I guess, of the network is really to serve three functions. First of all, we convene a networking space, bringing together different types of organisations, individuals and networks to think quite critically about what research means in the context of development studies with the decolonisation agenda specifically. Secondly, we look at to develop and consolidate existing capacity resources to support individuals, organisations and networks to engage in more fair and equitable research practice, collaboration. And thirdly, we have more of an advocacy agenda working with research funders, policy organisations to think quite critically about what research means in different contexts. And in the UK, which is a very specific context, we're looking at what ODA funding means for research in terms of what are the obligations for impact, for collaboration, for ethics, and what does that mean for building capacity. So that's more or less what we do. It's a very fluid network at the moment. Please do look at our website and I'll circulate it through the hashtag later, and everybody is welcome to join us. I'm going to talk just today very quickly about a study that we did for UKRI, focused on their GCRF and Newton Fund programs, but also looking across their work in research with an international development focus. The idea was to try and map a partner's perspective on fair and equitable partnerships. We looked at three groups of partners: one, academics in the Global South; two, civil society organisations and social movements in the Global South; and three, international NGOs and other sort of broker organisations and capacity providers, mainly from civil society, some from the private sector based in the UK. Through a number of networks, we mapped partner groups we mapped partners across these three groups. We convened a series of focus groups, online focus groups through webinars. We conducted some follow-up interviews and we sent out an open call for statements from different organisations and networks. And the idea was to understand how are people engaging in UKRI funded research at the moment, what is the experience of being a partner, what are some of the positive stories, but particularly what are some of the challenges. After this, we convened a roundtable meeting, mainly with UK-based stakeholders. So as well as the partner groups and academics, we included research funders from across the different councils, organisations like UK CDR, and other funders and some people involved in DFID and BEIS and other policy-based spaces. The idea was to I should also say we also did a sort of mapping of existing resources on equitable collaboration, equitable research collaboration. So based on the primary research that we conducted and this consolidation of existing resources and the roundtable discussion, we came up with 8 principles for fair and equitable partnerships. You can find all of this on our website again very, very quickly. These focus quite critically on on the idea of partnerships. So we didn't just look at the partnerships themselves, but we looked more broadly at the idea of collaboration in research. And this included in agenda setting, not just design of specific projects, but broader agenda setting by research funders. So who's involved in that? Who gets to be on the strategic committees for different calls and different schemes? We looked at design of research, we looked at peer evaluation, who was on evaluation committees, who got to decide which research counted as high quality research. We looked at the partnerships themselves, so implementation and communication of research, but we also looked at uptake and adaptation and use, which might not be done by the research partners or even by academics, or might. And crucially, we looked at research not just which was led by academics, but also which was led by civil society organisations. So we took quite a broad idea of what both research was and collaboration was within this. The principles, the first one is really focusing on poverty, which we sort of use in a kind of social justice sense. So rather than starting with the research question, you start with the kind of, if it's funded by ODAs, particularly you start with the objective to respond in a social justice sense to poverty. The second one was focusing on different contexts, mapping the different actors, stakeholders in those contexts. The third principle was then building on those contexts, redressing evidence hierarchies. So first identifying the hierarchies of knowledge within these different spaces, and then thinking about how you might redress that through the research. Those are the first three. I'm going to struggle with the other five. There was one on adaptive and flexible research, which I think is really important in partnerships. There was one on recognising diversity of skills and knowledge, and that has implications for how research is represented, not necessarily just as journal articles, but through other creative or other means dependent on which groups you're working with. There was another one on investing, real kind of financial investment in the relationship. All of this work takes huge amounts of time, so you have to make sure that's factored in. There was another one on transparency in budgets as well as programming. And I think the final one is on learning, so really kind of providing space to reflect on learning across these different collaborations, not just the partners reflecting on learning, but also research funders and policymakers, and making sure that these learning-based mechanisms are in place. So just two kind of concluding thoughts and questions which might be interesting to take up in this group. One of these was that we very, very quickly saw that you can't focus on improving partnerships at the level of the partnership alone. Collaboration is a systemic issue, and you have to think about the issues which are preventing partnerships. So, for example, one of the many obstacles which came up was around visas, and this has implications for UK and other countries' policy through actors in the UK anyway, like such as the Home Office, and what this means. So you need to engage with that. You need to engage with the funding itself. There are certain mechanisms built into the to UKRI, to the different research councils in the UK, which prevent fair and equitable partnerships. And if you don't work at the level of these mechanisms, not just the funders, but the actual mechanisms such as the JES system, which means you can and can't do certain things, then again it affects how you can participate. And then the other issue was, and this is sort of inspired by some work we're starting to develop, and this is really kind of using futures thinking to think not just about research partnerships now, but also how these might change in line with different challenges which are affecting us. And the obvious one is climate change. So at the moment, we're focusing on convening spaces, bringing partnerships into the same space. But in the future, when mobility is less of an issue, how can we actually ensure fair and equitable partnerships which perhaps are more virtual? We know that it's so difficult to do this complex work at a distance, and face-to-face is important, but how can we think about ways to democratise virtual spaces as well? That's just an example, but there are lots of other questions around these two issues. So I guess, the thoughts I would leave you with are, what are the sort of broader systemic issues which we need to grapple with in order to improve equitable collaboration, and secondly, how might the nature of collaboration change in the future, and how can we respond to that within our institutions, our own practice, but also at a more systemic level. Thank you.